The Great Wall of China. I mean, we all know it. It's one of the most famous structures on Earth, a symbol of ancient power and sheer human will that we all think we have a handle on. But what if the story we've been told isn't just a little off? What if it's actually mathematically impossible? Well, according to the source material we're digging into today, that's exactly the case. So, let's get into it.
Let's just start with a really simple physical problem. Forget the history books for just a second and just think about the pure logistics of it. How long would it take you to move a single stone, and not just any stone, one that's heavier than an entire modern house, across miles and miles of brutal terrain with absolutely no engines? Just kind of keep that question in the back of your mind as we go through this.
And right here, this is the core argument from our source. It's saying that the moment you stop looking at the romantic story and you start looking at the cold, hard numbers, the weight, the distance, the insane quantity of materials, the official narrative just completely shatters.
And this really gets to the heart of how we're conditioned to see the wall. You know, a lot of us grew up with these powerful stories, kind of like Mulan, this heroic tale of defending China from invaders from the north. It's simple, it's compelling, it makes sense. But the source points out that this story, and the official history it's based on, totally sidesteps the math. It just ignores the logistical nightmare that we are about to break down.
Okay, so let's actually get into that math. For this first part of our explainer, we're going to focus purely on the numbers, which the source claims are the story's big undoing.
First up, the weight of just an average stone block. According to the source's calculations, we're talking about almost 1,500 pounds. That's 3/4 of a ton. And remember, that's for a standard block.
But the foundation stones? Oh, that's a whole different level. We're talking over 10 tons each. Now, to put that into perspective, the source notes that a single one of these stones weighs as much as the entire concrete foundation of an average house today. One block.
So, how many of these blocks are we talking about in total? Well, based on the wall's official length, height, and width, the source calculates a number that is just staggering. Almost 4 billion stone blocks. That's billion with a B. And here it is. This is the mathematical punchline. To get the wall done in the official 2,000-year timeline, the source calculates that workers would have had to quarry, transport, and perfectly place 220 stones every single hour. That's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 2,000 years. No stopping for winter, no stopping for wars, no weekends off.
So you see, it's not just the raw numbers, it's the relentless, grinding logistics. The source argues that just moving one of these massive stones from a quarry hundreds of miles away, over mountains and deserts, would take a small army of people. And that common explanation you always hear, oh, it was built over many generations, well, that ignores a key fact. The older parts of the wall would be crumbling into dust long before the new parts were ever finished. Okay, so if the source is right, if the how of building the wall is a logistical fantasy, then that forces us to question the why. Suddenly, the whole purpose of the wall is up for grabs.
The official story we all learned says the wall was built to keep out northern invaders like the Huns. But the source poses a very simple strategic question. Why would you build a 13,000-mile-long defensive line against small, mobile groups of nomadic raiders? I mean, they weren't some massive army laying siege for months. They could have just ridden around the end of it. The source argues the strategies just make zero sense.
And this is where this whole explainer takes a really sharp turn. The source material introduces a totally different theory, and it centers on a forgotten empire called Great Tartary.
And this slide really shows the core of the argument. The source claims that if you go look at maps from before the mid-1800s, you will find this huge empire called Tartary sitting right to the north of China. And the location of the Great Wall, it isn't random at all. It perfectly traces the southern border of that very empire.
But here is what the source calls the smoking gun, the physical architecture of the wall itself. You see, the key defensive features, the arrow slits, the watchtowers, the steep side of the wall, they all face one direction, north. They're built to defend against the threat from the north, from the direction of Tartary.
So, this north-facing design leads the source to two possible conclusions, and both of them completely flip the script. Scenario 1. The wall was built by the Chinese to defend against a powerful, organized Tartarian empire, not just some random raiders. Or Scenario 2, which is even more radical, the Tartarian Empire itself built the wall as a containment barrier to keep the Chinese population in the south. Either way, Tartary is presented as the dominant power in this relationship.
Now this obviously brings up a huge question. If this massive empire was real and so powerful that it required the Great Wall, where did it go? Why have most of us never even heard of it?
Well, the source lays out a timeline for what it calls a coordinated erasure. It claims that before the 1850s, Tartary was just a standard feature on maps all over the world. But then, between the mid-19th and early 20th century, a series of global events, wars, mysterious great fires, re-education programs, systematically dismantled the empire. And by the 1930s, it had effectively vanished from the public record.
But how could something so huge just be erased? The source proposes a pretty simple four-step process. Step 1. You redraw all the maps. Step 2. You rewrite all the history books. Step 3. You take their physical evidence, like say the Great Wall, and you claim it as your own. And finally, Step 4. You systematically suppress any story that contradicts your new narrative.
And that brings us right back around full circle. The source concludes that simple, emotionally powerful stories are taught instead of complex, uncomfortable questions. You know, it's just easier to teach a heroic myth than it is to explain away logistical impossibilities and inconvenient old maps.
So we end where we started, looking at the Great Wall. The material we've gone through today presents a really radical challenge to its story, using the structure itself as the main piece of evidence. And it really forces us to ask a simple question. What if the biggest things we think we know about our past are actually built on a foundation that, when you really do the math, just doesn't add up? Thanks for joining me on this explainer.